Hello everyone, welcome to week 7. This week we will be looking at the power of Razor to render HTML. For the example in this tutorial, what I've done is I've edited last week's tutorial again to just show you the basics of what Razor can do. So you can use C# syntax in Razor to render HTML, meaning that you have the power of variables, loops, conditional statements, switch statements, classes, and so forth. So I created a list of names. And the first name is Pete, the second name is Jess, and Brendani, and Mary. This list was created on the server side, and then it was rendered on the view using Razor. I've also added a conditional statement in Razor, which is that it should output is a lecturer if the name is Rendani. So let's get into it. Our home controller, hello controller, looks like this from last week, and the index page looks like that. If you hover over my message, it's of type dynamic, and then it says this is an object whose operations will be resolved at runtime, meaning it's untyped when you code it, but it determines the type when the code is run. So, for example, here my message will be interpreted as a string, because if this was just an integer like that, then my message would have been rendered as an integer, and so forth. So we want to send an array to the front end, and then on the front end we will use Razor to render the HTML we need. So for that we will create a list type dynamic called names. Then we just have to initiate it. A list is just a collection. We'll go into the details of lists later, but you can create a list of any type. So you can create a list of ints, of strings. We want a list of dynamic. To add items to the list, you simply go .add. So names.add Pete. And you can copy this line. Pete, Chase, Brendani, Mary. We will then say viewBag.names is equal to names. This then stores the names array in the viewBag under the variable names. We can change my message back to a string, and then we can go and have a look on the front end. So the one thing you have to remember about Razor is that it renders HTML. Razor is run on the server side, and then it gets rendered as HTML. It does not get run on the client side like JavaScript. So firstly, we can create that heading that says the names. For that, I'll simply use HTML there. So this is not going to be in a heading. You can just say razor for each variable name in viewBag.names. And the name. Okay. If we run this, let's see what happens. Hello, and then it will say the names: Pete, Chase, Rindani, Mary. So a lot of our work is done. All that we have to do is add an if statement to say if it renders Rindani, then it should also render the text is a lecturer. First, I want to show you how breakpoints would work here. So if we add a breakpoint there and then refresh the page, press F11, you see that it's created, that there's no items in the list. Now we added one item, so there's one item in the list, and so forth. Eventually there's 4 items in the list. You can go into that list and we can see what the items are. Just press F5 to continue. And then we can go back to our index and simply add an if statement. So we go if. You can see that we're in the for each block, so we don't have to put the at there again. We had to put the at sign there because we were in HTML. So otherwise it would have just rendered the word name and not accessed the variable, the local variable with the name. So we say if name is equal to Rindani, then we render HTML saying that he is a lecturer. So you'll see that this HTML will only get rendered if this is true. If it's not true, it will not get rendered. Obviously, if we wanted something else to happen, if it wasn't true, we can add an else. And if there was a lot of conditions, we can use switch. For each loops are also very useful in C# when you're working with lists. With a for each loop, you directly get the object and you avoid off by 1 errors. Typically, you'd use for loops if you need a counter, and then you should be wary of off by 1 errors. What I also want to do here is put this in a div to make my code more clean, so I can go div like that, and then copy this. Then on the front end, on the browser, we can shift refresh. The difference between refresh and shift refresh is that shift refresh ensures that you do not reload from cached content. Instead, it fetches the content again from the server side. And since we wanted to run the server side again, we use Shift F5. You will see that HTML was output when the condition was met that the name was Rendani. So this is pretty straightforward, but we've done a couple of things that you can study yourself for the coming lectures. The use of lists is very important in C#. You can have a study on dynamic objects that is usually used to send objects back to views, even if you're using Ajax or view models. View models can also be sent in another way. You can go and have a look at Razor syntax, the use of for loops, for each loops, and while loops. There's also a do while loop in C#. So go and look at the differences and analyze which one would be more appropriate to use in which circumstances. The syntax for each loop is like that, and the var keyword is for untyped. So if we used int here, it would have crashed because the list at the back was not a list of ints, it was a list of dynamic. That's why if you hover over the var keyword, it tells you that it's dynamic. It has already determined that this list is a list of dynamics. Go and study if statements again and Boolean operators like that, when to use and, or, and so forth. And thank you very much for listening. I hope you learnt a lot.